All right. Hey, everybody. My name is Nathan Smith, and I'm the Digital Programming Coordinator here at the Central Arkansas Library System. Thanks so much for joining me today for Microsoft Word Part 1. This is part of a two-part series, so I definitely encourage folks to check out both. This class is going to cover a lot of the basics, and then in part 2, which is actually tomorrow, same time, same place, we are going to get into some some kind of intermediate features that are really, really useful. You won't need to know anything else about using Word apart from what you'll learn today to attend tomorrow's session. So if you're new to this, that's great. You'll still be in the right place tomorrow since you're here today. Let's go ahead. So anyway, if you haven't registered for the other class it works out schedule-wise, I definitely encourage you to go ahead and get in there. And I will drop the link for that into the Zoom chat and into the live chat and comments over on the stream. So here we go. All right, excellent. So a few other quick preliminary things to get out of the way here before we dive in to the topic. First of all, I always encourage folks in all of my classes to ask questions whenever they come to you. Don't worry about whether it's kind of a silly question or if it's a bit off the beaten path. If you're like, well, I don't, maybe this is off topic or something. I'm not concerned about that at all. What I always want to do in class is, it's a technology class, so I want to teach folks how to use technology well. If you're learning things about technology that are useful to you, even if it's something that's not on my outline, then that's a fantastic use of our time. That's a successful technology class to me. To me, what's not a successful technology class is if I sit here and talk for an hour and a half and the things that I say are kind of going in one ear and out the other, and you don't really understand what I'm talking about. You have questions, but you are afraid to ask them. Because what often happens when we have questions and we're afraid to ask them, or we just are like, oh, it's not the right time or whatever, is we're kind of distracted by that little question's jumping up and down in the back of our minds, and we can't focus on what's actually happening in the class. Happens to me all the time. So if that's you, if you have questions at any point, speak up and let me know, and I will make sure that they get addressed. Absolute worst case scenario, I'll say, well, here's a brief answer to that, but we don't really have time to go into a lot of detail. Or I'll say, oh, we're going to cover that later. I definitely encourage you to ask questions whenever they come to you, so that way we can make sure that I'm able to tackle those, and that you're able to follow along and have a good grasp of the material by the time we're done today. So how do you do that? Well, there are a few different ways. One, if you're here in Zoom, then you can ask. If you're on a computer, all you need to do is go down to the bottom of your Zoom window, and there is a little speech bubble that says chat, and just click on that. Click on that little speech bubble. That'll slide out the chat on the side usually, or in some cases give you a little pop-up box that has the chat in it. Just type in your questions and press enter, or return if you're on a Mac. If you, of course, ask your questions, put your comments in there, and we'll have a good time. If you're in Zoom, but on a mobile device rather than a computer, that is also perfectly fine. all you need to do is tap the middle of the screen on your device and look in the corner, up in the corner for a button that says More. Tap on that More button, and then you should see chat as one of the options. Tap on that, and that'll open up the chat box where you can type in your question and send it to me. If you are joining me on one of the live streams on Facebook or YouTube, all you need to do is on Facebook, use the comments, just like you would on any other post on all of Facebook. Put your questions in the comments there. I'll see them and I'll be able to tackle them. If you're joining me on YouTube, use the live chat that's over on my left, your right. All right, let's see, here we go. Okay. Wow, that was strange. All right, let me make sure everything's still working properly. My whole Zoom crashed for just a moment there. Very odd. Okay, I see someone using the hand raise feature. Go ahead. If you have a question, just type it into the chat, and that'll be great. And I will make sure we tackle it. Let's see. Okay, good. Looks like everything still seems to be working. Excellent. So, okay. So, wow, that was a rough way to do it, but that is kind of a nice transition in a way to the other thing that I want to say before we really get into the meat of the material. And that is if you are, if there are technical difficulties that aren't as obvious as the ones we just experienced, then please let me know about that. And again, use the chat or the live chat or the live chat on YouTube, the comments on Facebook, or the Zoom chat here in Zoom. And let's see, that's all right. Okay. I think we're all set. Let's go ahead and dive in. So, so let's see. All right, I'm going to fire up the screen sharing here. And there we go. Excellent. All right. And all right. Good. Okay, so first what we're going to do, since this is a class covering the basics of using Word, we're going to talk about some of the basics of using Word. So when you first open up Microsoft Word, you're going to get some screen that looks kind of like this. So this is kind of your starting out screen, more or less. What that, and you can do a few things here. Over on the left-hand side, you have some basic options. You've got your, this new option over here, which is your, which would allow you to create a new document, but you can also do that over here. And it's a little more convenient in that spot. You've got your open option here, so you can open an existing Word file on your computer. Up here at the top, you have what are called templates, basically little starter documents where you can sort of fill in the example content that they, or replace the example content that they provide you with your own content. And that way, that way you don't have to start from a completely blank slate. But you have a document that does what you're actually wanting it to do. And then down here, we've got recent, and these are going to be the documents that you've opened recently on this particular computer in Word. So you can click one and quickly jump into it. All right, so what we're going to do, oh yeah, and down here at the bottom, we have account, feedback, and options. Account is going to be dealing with your Microsoft account, which, changing the settings on that and that sort of thing. Changing your subscription if you have a subscription to something like Office 365 or that sort of thing. Feedback is going to be just letting Microsoft know about things that you'd like to see Word do in the future, maybe, or stuff that is, or problems that you encounter, that sort of thing. And then options is going to be to change the settings for Word. Let me go ahead and click on blank document here. And that is going to, well, give us a blank document. Let's see. I do still see someone with their hands up. Please go ahead and, if you have a question, go ahead and click on the chat button down at the bottom of the screen, type in your chat message and press enter there. So that way we can tackle that question for you. Let's see. So that person seems to be appearing and disappearing. Yeah, any questions you have, just type them into the chat. Don't worry about the raise hands thing. That doesn't really do anything helpful. Okay, so here we are on kind of the main screen here in Word. And let's talk about the layout here a little bit. So up at the very top, in the top left, we have what's called the Quick Access Toolbar. The Quick Access Toolbar basically, well, it gives us quick access to a few little useful things that we need. It's a little shortcut area. In the very top left here is this autosave switch right here. And if you're working on a document that's stored online in one of Microsoft's online services, so either either Microsoft OneDrive or Microsoft SharePoint, which some folks use for work. If you have your document stored online in one of those places, then this autosave function will usually turn on by default, and Word will just save your work as you go along, which is nice because if something happens, your computer crashes, or you run into some other serious issue, or you're on a desktop computer and the power goes out or something like that. If you're interrupted and working on your document, or if you suddenly just exit Word because you have to go really quickly or whatever, you don't have to worry about losing your work. So that's really handy. But of course, sometimes it's not always what you want. Sometimes you're starting out with a particular version of a document and you want to kind of make a bunch of changes and see how they work before you actually save your work. So it just depends on how you work and what kind of thing you're working on. So you can turn that off if it's not useful for you. If you're just working on a document that's stored on your computer, then that's going to stay off and you're not going to be able to turn it on. It only works for documents that are stored online. Next to that, on a related note, is the Save button. If you're working on a document that's already on your computer and you are making some changes, updating that document in some way, clicking on that Save button will just update the existing file with whatever the changes were that you've made since the last time you saved. Pretty straightforward. If you're working on a brand new document, clicking that Save button is going to actually prompt you to name your document and pick a specific spot on your computer for it to be stored. So, you know, a lot of times folks will end up putting their Word documents in the documents folder. That makes a lot of sense, right? You know, there could be a number of different things that you might do just depending on how you're approaching things. So so that essentially, when you click it the first time on a new document, it really triggers what's called the save as function, where you can name your document and give it a place to live on your computer. Once you do that, though, clicking that save button again just updates the existing file. Okay, so next to that are two really useful buttons. This one on the left is the undo button. And the undo button exists because we are all human and we all make mistakes, right? So when you make a mistake, let's say you delete a paragraph of text that you meant to keep. Great, no worries. All you need to do is click this undo button and you're good to go. You're back where you needed to be. If you make multiple mistakes in a row, and you know, who among us hasn't done that, then you can hit the undo button multiple times to go back several steps worth of mistakes. And that's even more useful. But sometimes you can get a little overzealous. And so there's sort of a companion button that will sometimes show up next to it called the redo button. The undo button, if you look at it, it's a little arrow that's pointing off to the kind of curving off to the left here. The redo button, which is not here right now, it's in its place is the repeat button, which we'll talk about in a minute. But the redo button looks like a mirror image of the same thing. So it's kind of an arrow that's curving off to the right. And the redo button undoes your undoing. So if you had so let's say I made 3 mistakes, but in my haste to correct things, I instead accidentally hit undo 5 times. I've undone the 3 mistakes, but I've also undone 2 steps of work that I actually wanted to keep. Thankfully, the redo button is there, and so I can click the redo button twice to get back to where exactly I needed to be. The only thing about the redo button is it's kind of like time travel. If you think about like a time travel movie, you go back in time, you change the past. When you return to, you know, the present, it's not the same as it was before. You know, the Twin Pines Mall becomes the Lone Pine Mall and things like that. And so and in the same way, you can, you know, when you use the undo button, you're kind of going back in time. And when you make changes to your document after you use undo, you're sort of changing the timeline. And so the way it was before no longer exists. So you can only use the redo button as the very next action after you use the undo button. It's not on a timer or anything, but if you make any other changes to your document after you hit undo, but before you try to use redo, it's not going to work. It changed the timeline. And so you're stuck now, and you might have to redo something. So I mostly say all that to say, if you hit undo, particularly if you hit it multiple times, just look over your work really quickly. Make sure you didn't undo some work you intended to keep. If you did, the redo button's there for you. If you didn't, then you're good to go. Keep going. The rest of the time, when you haven't just hit undo, you have the repeat button here. And the repeat button basically is going to take the same action over and over again. So if you change some text to red, let's say, then you could go find some other text and you could hit the repeat button to change it to the same shade of red, and so on and so forth. So that's a nice way to do an action repeatedly. And that can be really handy at times. Finally, there's a little drop-down arrow here. If I click on that, then I can customize the quick access toolbar and add some of these other options, or what we call commands here. Or I can just go down and click more commands, so that essentially any option that's available in all of Word can be added to my quick access toolbar there. Okay, so that's the quick access toolbar. Next to that, we've got this where it says document 1 Word. So that's just telling me I'm working in Microsoft Word, just in case I forgot. And then over here where it says document 1, that's a placeholder, and that'll be replaced by the name of the document when and if I actually save it. And then over here is a little search bar. The search bar allows you to like search for help and things like that, or search for specific functions of the program, which can be pretty handy. That's a very new feature. This you'll probably only see in, I want to say maybe Word 2016 and onward, or maybe even later. By the way, I'm currently using the Office 365, or I think maybe they call it Microsoft 365 version of Word. But if you have a different version of Word, then don't worry about it. It's pretty much everything I'm going to talk about is going to apply just the same for you on an older version. The main differences are going to be cosmetic, and there are some kind of advanced features or new things that that they've added, but we don't really cover those in this class or tomorrow's class. And so most of the differences are going to be just visual. Okay, so that's the top area here. Down below is what we call the ribbon. And the ribbon is a design concept that Microsoft likes an awful lot. They use it in a lot of their software. But I like to think of it kind of like a tool chest. So if you think about, if you go somewhere like, my mic is, there we go. Okay, that's better. So if you think about if you go somewhere like a kind of a if you go to a wood shop or a mechanic's shop or somewhere like that, where you where they use a lot of tools, a lot of times you'll find that that they have big old tool chests with a bunch of drawers in them. And if they're well organized, what they probably have is a drawer for the wrenches, and a drawer for the screwdrivers, and a drawer for the ratchets, and so on and so forth, so that they can just go over, find the exact tool they need, grab it, and then get back to work, more or less, right? Rather than having to dig through a big old pile of tools or look through 6 different little toolboxes that have different sets of tools and stuff like that. That'd all be a big hassle. So having a tool chest that's sorted out makes it easy. You can just go over, grab the tool you need, close the drawer, and get right back to work. The ribbon in Microsoft Program is the same way. Rather than having a zillion different toolbars and 500 menus and maybe a little floating box out somewhere in the middle of the program, instead of all that stuff, you can just have essentially one place to look for all the tools, or as Microsoft calls them, commands that you need to work in Microsoft Word. So let's look at that. The Home tab is the tab that contains tools that we use probably most frequently when we're working in Word. That's a bunch of different things. A lot of them we'll talk about today. Some of them we'll talk about tomorrow. But just your basics. So maybe the tools that the mechanic doesn't even bother putting away, because they know they're going to need them again. Another tool that we have, or another tab that we have here, is the Insert tab. When I click on that, it gives me options that deal with, as you might imagine, inserting things into your document, things like tables and pictures and links to websites and even videos, all sorts of things. Most of the time I probably wouldn't put a video in your your Word document, but that's something that you could do theoretically if you really wanted to. Next to that is the Design tab here, and the Design tab deals with essentially the look and feel of your document. That's not, that's something that we'll talk about tomorrow. It's pretty cool what you can do with this, but just that's something that that's a place that you can look for those types of options. The layout tab has a few different things to kind of deal with the overall structure or setup of your document. So things like the margins, the orientation, essentially whether your paper is portrait like this or sort of landscape on its side, kind of like this. You can change the size of your page, the number of columns, and a bunch of other stuff. We'll talk about a little bit more of that as we move forward later on today. Next to that is the References tab. This is for citing your sources. Obviously, if you're writing reports for school or white papers for professional work or things like that, super duper important to cite your sources. You don't want to be accused of plagiarism, and frankly, you don't want to do plagiarism. That's rude. And so make sure you use this References tab to cite your sources. The Mailings tab is about primarily doing what are called mail merges. Mail merges are something that we'll talk about in tomorrow's class. And they're really, really cool. Basically, you can give everyone who's going to receive a copy of your document their own personalized copy. So that way it's more applicable to them, and it just makes them feel better about it. The Review tab here gives you options for checking your work, like checking spelling and grammar and things like that. The thesaurus, in case you find yourself overusing a particular word. And then collaboration tools here, like comments and tracked changes, which we'll talk about tomorrow. The View tab basically allows you to change your view of the document without changing the contents of it. So you can change to what it calls web layout, where you don't see like the margins and the edges of pages and stuff. You just see the text, and you can zoom in and out, things like that. And then there are 3 tabs over here. The Developer tab probably won't appear in your version of Word unless you turn it on. And we're not going to deal with that, so don't worry about it. It has very advanced options that you can take advantage of if you know how. There's an Acrobat tab because I have Adobe Acrobat installed on my computer. You probably don't, and we're not going to deal with that because it's not a standard thing that comes with Word. And then there's a Help tab here, so you can look at the help documentation. You can contact Microsoft support. You can give them feedback if you run into problems and so forth. And then finally, there's the File tab on the left here. If I click on that, it takes me to this view, which Microsoft calls the Backstage. It's very similar to the sort of home screen that we started out with, and has most of the same functions. But in addition to the stuff that was over here on the left when we first started, we have Info, which will tell me essentially basic information, sort of your key stats about your document. And we have a bunch of other options that we didn't have before, such as save as, print, share, export, transform. That's new. I'm not exactly sure what that does. Transform it into a web page. Seems a little out of date, honestly. And then there's a don't click it, but there's a close option here. And that allows you to close the document you're working in without closing Word itself. If you do accidentally do that, no worries, just go up here and click blank document again, so that way you can get back to where we were. To get out of the Backstage without using any of the options, or when you're done with it, you can click this left arrow up at the top. There we go. Okay, I'm going to click the Home tab up here before I forget. Make sure you can go ahead and do the same, so that way you are you're ready when we get there. And then finally, of course, down here we have our actual sort of workspace, our page here. The way that this, you've got your page in the middle, and we'll type some things in there in a moment. And then you have what's called a ruler up here at the top and over here on the left. Depending on your settings, that may or may not be showing up for you. If you want to see it, you can click View and check the box next to Ruler here. But that kind of tells you where you are on the page, and so forth. And then finally, down here is what we call the status bar. It keeps a page count, a word count. and you can use this little bar to zoom in and out by dragging there. All right, so that's the layout. I know that's might feel like a lot, but I want to make sure you know where things are so that you so you can find them when you need them. And you'll, whenever I say, oh, go to such and such a thing, you'll see me do it too. So if you're like, I'm not going to remember some of that, that's perfectly fine. Don't worry about it. It'll all be good. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started doing a little bit of writing. So I'm just going to write some nonsense. Y'all can write something that you want to write, or you can copy mine if you really want to. But I'm just going to get something on the page so that we can play around with it. Okay, great. Now we've got it. So got a little bit of text there so we can play around with it. And there are a few things I want to point out. A lot of what I'm about to say here for just a moment is probably not going to be news to everyone watching here, but I do want to just say it. Whenever I'm typing here on the page, what happens when I get to the end of a line, I can just keep typing. I don't have to worry about moving down to the next line manually myself. I can just keep going. If I want to start a new paragraph, however, I'm going to press Enter or Return if you're on a Mac, and that's going to take me down here. And now I can do that. Now, in sort of English class back in the day, they always told us that a paragraph is usually supposed to contain 2 or more sentences that are kind of thematically connected and things like that. And while that may be true from an English perspective, the way that Word counts paragraphs is it looks at whenever you press Enter and it says, oh, that's a new paragraph. And so even if I had just one word, Word considers that to be a paragraph. So just bear that in mind whenever Word talks about paragraphs. What it means is essentially the words between times when you hit Enter to make a new line. Word also inserts a little bit of like a space here in between paragraphs. And what that does is it allows you to see the or it allows you to tell the paragraphs apart visually without really having to do anything. That means in most cases, unless you have a specific assignment that's otherwise, in most cases you can feel free to do your you can feel free to not indent the beginning of a paragraph. That's kind of an older style of doing this, and you don't really need that with modern word processing because of this automatic space that's put between the paragraphs. We'll talk about how to adjust that later if you need to. And you can also, by the way, just to save yourself a little bit of work, you don't need to bother with putting 2 spaces after a period before the beginning of a new sentence. One space is more acceptable and perfectly fine. So don't worry about that either. Just give yourself a break. You can save those, that cumulative 5 seconds or so, and use it to relax. All right, so we've got our text here. Looks good. Now we can play around with it a little bit. So what we're going to do is, first of all, I'm going to select some text. I can do this a couple of different ways. One way I can do this is move my mouse next to, I'm going to get this this sentence right here that says, "It was a lovely afternoon." I'm going to move my mouse pointer next to that text. I'm going to hold down with my mouse button, and I'm going to drag over until I get this kind of gray shading or highlighting around, that sentence that I was interested in working with. And what that does, like I said, that selects the text. So it allows me to pick it out to be able to do something specific with it. Another way to do this, if you've got your hand on the keyboard rather than close to the mouse, is to hold down the Shift key on your keyboard and use the arrow keys to move around. You can move left and right one character with the left and right buttons, or if you want to get a whole line at a time, you can use the up and down arrow keys to do that. Again, you do have to hold Shift the whole time that you're doing that. Once you've got all the text selected that you wanted to select, let go of Shift and you're good to go. Okay, cool. So we've got our sentence selected here. Now let's make some changes to it. Up here at the top, we've got this whole font area right here. You'll notice, at least on mine, it says font, and then it's got these particular controls. Let's deal with these and get them figured out a little bit. So up here at the top left of this section is it says Calibri body in this sort of drop-down box here. If I click on that, then it's going to give me a drop-down. It's going to give me a drop-down menu, and I can select a different font. Now, if you're not familiar with the terminology, when I say font, all that means is the way that the letters and numbers and other symbols that I'm typing look on the screen or on the page when they're printed. And so a font is just a collection of designs for all of the characters that I'm going to need while I'm typing something out. And so Calibri is the font that I'm using currently, but I've got a whole bunch of other fonts that I could choose from. I'll go ahead and grab one up. Let's see. I'll go with Broadway this time. See how that goes. Okay, looks good. All right, I've got that changed. So now I have a different look for my text, and that's great. You'll notice it doesn't say body or anything in parentheses next to that. Calibri is the name of the font that I was using, but when it says body in parentheses, that has to do with what we call styles, which we'll talk about tomorrow in part 2. Okay, so next to that, also, oh, by the way, if I know the font that I want to use, rather than clicking in the drop-down box and scrolling down until I get to it, I can start typing the name of the font. And then when it comes up, I can just press enter on my keyboard, and that will switch to that particular font. Okay, so next to that, I have the font size. The default font size in Word right now is 11 point, which is kind of a standard business font size. So if you're writing a business letter to someone, then 11 point is the size to use, unless the font is unusually tiny or unusually large, in which case adjust accordingly. But generally speaking, 11 point is the right size font to use in something like a business letter. So 11 is what's currently selected. If I click on the drop-down arrow, though, I could go in this menu as low as 8 or as high as 72, pretty big. If I want a different size, say a size larger than 72 or a size smaller than 8, or a size that's in between one of these. For example, I have I have 28 here, and then it goes right up to 36. If I want just 32 or something, then I can also, again, type that into the box up at the top, press enter on my keyboard, and that gives me exactly the size that I was looking for. Great. So we've got it. So that's your font and your font size. Next to that are a couple of buttons. There's increase font size and decrease font size. And as you might imagine, they do exactly what it says on the label. If you click the increase font size button, it'll go to just the next size that was in that list of font sizes. If you click the decrease font size, it'll go to the next size down. So that's pretty straightforward. If you need to, if you just want to see like, okay, kind of what approximate size would I need? That's a good way to do it. You can sort of get a feel for how big do I need this text to be. Next to that is your change case button. So the change case button, what this does, if I click on it, I can change the capitalization for the text that's selected right now. So sentence case, of course, just capitalizes the first letter of each sentence, just like you would expect. And sometimes it'll even leave proper nouns alone, but sometimes it won't. So just be mindful of that. Lowercase, of course, will change my text to all lowercase. Uppercase, of course, capitalizes the whole thing. Capitalize each word is exactly what it sounds like. And of course, you have toggle case, which makes everything that was capital lowercase and everything that was lowercase capital. So, if you're working off a document where the capitalization was inconsistent, or you're trying to take something that was written in all caps or all lowercase and change it to be more standard or whatever, then this option is definitely very useful. I'm going to skip over this A with the eraser right now. We'll come back to it in just a sec. Underneath the name of my font are some what we call formatting options. So there's bold. If I click it, it applies, it makes the whole sentence bold. Click it again, it goes back to sort of regular. Italic, same thing. Click it to turn it on, click it again to turn it off. Underlining, if I click the U with the underline underneath it, then it underlines the whole thing. If I click the drop-down arrow next to that, though, it's going to give me other options for ways that I could make my underlining look. So I could do double underlines, a thicker underline, these sort of dotted lines, these sort of dotted lines, a whole bunch of different things like that. You've got your wavy underline, and there are several other settings. Excuse me. And you can even change the color if you want to. Whatever you select in this menu, if I say go with the wavy ones, then that becomes the new default. So if I go to a different piece of text here and go back up and click underline again, then it's going to give me the wavy underline for that as well. So just bear that in mind. And it's more obvious when I choose a different style. So if I go with the double, no, I guess not. In any case, whatever style you choose is going to become the default. So in the future, when you click the U, then it'll give you that default style rather than the basic single underline, unless that is the default. You've got strike through, so you can have text that's crossed out inside your document. And then you've got subscript and superscript. For the most part, those are only used in things like math and science, but you can, you may need to use them for some other purpose. One time where you might use superscript where you don't necessarily need to make any tweaks, though, is in something like this. If I were typing something like June 9th, when I hit the space bar, you'll notice my June 9th changes from 9th, all, the standard size, and it makes the th small. It makes it into superscript. Excuse me. And so that's, that can give your document a nice bit of additional polish um, because it automatically forwards it that way. That's called auto format. If for some reason I didn't want it to do that, I can hit undo. And even though that wasn't a specific action that I took, when I hit undo, it will set the th back to the way it was before. So if it does something like that and you don't like it, just hit undo and that will correct the problem. All right, so next to that, we've got our, we have text effects and typography, highlighting, and font color. So let's talk about this text effects and typography. I'm going to select my "It was a lovely afternoon" again, and I'm going to click on this kind of glowing A right here. When I click on that, it gives me a bunch of options of different ways I can make the text look. For example, this one has, this one's just black like it was before, but it does have a subtle drop shadow behind it. So it gives it a little bit, makes it kind of pop visually, just a little bit. This one also has a drop shadow, but it's blue. You've got your orange, light orange with a dark orange outline, and like a whole bunch of other things that you can do, just depending on how you want your text to look. And you can change those options independently as well. So you can come down here and choose whether you want an outline and what color it is, whether there's a shadow behind your text, a reflection underneath like this, a glow around your text. And for certain fonts, you can also use, they also have certain options in terms of the way that numbers are written. Ligatures, which are essentially little connections between two different letters, and what are called stylistic sets, where specific characters, if they appear together, it'll make them look fancy together, basically. Someone dropped out for a moment and was apologizing in the chat. No worries. It happened to me as well, as you saw at the beginning of class, probably. I think something weird is going on with Zoom today, maybe. So no worries. And if you want to go back and see the portion that you missed, I'm live streaming it right now to the Cal's YouTube channel. So you'll be able to check that out after the fact too. So yeah, please don't worry about it. It's perfectly fine. Okay, so so that's text effects and typography. Let me go ahead and apply one of these. So we'll do this kind of soft bevel gold one. All right. Now, next to that, oh my goodness, it's after lunch, y'all. Actually, let me undo that. I'm going to leave it like this for now, and then we'll come back and do something. Okay, so I have this button. We're skipping over this for a moment. We'll come back to that. I have this button. It's an A with a red color swatch underneath it. If I click on that, that's my font color. It's going to turn my text red. Shocker. Next to that, though, if I click this drop-down arrow, then rather than turning my text red, I can choose a specific color that I want my text to appear in. And it could be any sort of color that my little heart desires. I can pick from one of these colors that's included in the theme. We'll talk about themes tomorrow. I can choose from one of these others in the little color palette down below. I can choose one of the standard colors that they have here, or I can click more colors and mix my own, or even use a gradient where it fades from one color to another. Pretty cool. So you can pick whatever color you want and make your text that color. So I'll go over here and change it to text, or do the text effects and typography again. Okay, up here at the top is this A with the eraser next to it. When I click on that button, that's the clear all formatting button. And what it's going to do is all of the things that I just changed about this text, when I click on that, it's going to set them all back to normal, to the default settings. So Calibri as the font, 11 as the size. It removes any bold, italics, underlining, etc. Text effects and typography, the shadows, the colors, all of that stuff takes care of that and gets it all puts it back the way it was. And of course, the color of your text. My goodness. Okay. All right. So so that's the clear all formatting option. If you decide you've like made too many changes and it just looks too weird, then just go in, click on that, and as long as some text is selected, it's going to remove that formatting, the colors and the sizes and the styles and all that from the text and put it back to kind of the normal version of that. So last thing in this font area is down here, this text highlight color. If I click on this, what it's going to do is highlight this text, just like if I had taken out a yellow highlighter pen and, in a book or something. Obviously, don't do that on your computer screen. That could cause problems. So I can use this to highlight text. But you'll notice the text got deselected when it was highlighted. So if I select it again, it's selected and highlighted. And to remove the highlighting, I have to come up here and I have to have the text selected, and I have to come up here and click on the highlight button again. The other thing that I can do, if I don't have any text selected, I can click on the highlight button and it goes into essentially highlighter mode. So you'll notice my mouse pointer here has the little kind of eye-shaped line like it usually has when you're working with text, but it also has a highlighter marker in front of it. So if I come in here and I select some text, then it highlights that text rather than just selecting it. And if I want to remove the highlighting, I can drag over it again to unhighlight. You can click the drop-down arrow to change your highlighting color if you want, and you can use multiple colors to highlight for different types of things, just like you would with multiple colors of highlighter markers. But this text or this highlighting does not go away when you use this clear all formatting button. It'll get rid of all this other stuff, but not the highlighting. So just bear that in mind. You'll have to, if you want to remove highlighting, you'll have to manually remove it by either going into highlighter mode and dragging over it, or by selecting it, or if you're out of highlighter mode, selecting it beforehand and then clicking the highlight button. One last thing to mention about this section before we move on is if you change one of these styles without selecting any particular text, then that becomes the setting until you click to a different part of the document or until you change the settings back. So, for example, let's say I want a sentence written in bold. I'm going to click the B here. Nothing's selected down at the bottom, but I clicked on the little B, and now I'm going to type, this is in bold. If I change the color as well, then I get bold and blue, and so on. And then I can come in and change the formatting if I want to. But basically, any of those changes that you make before you start typing without anything selected, any of those changes will just apply to whatever you type moving forward. All right, so clear all formatting. Nice. Okay, great. So any questions about any of that stuff before we move on to some other things? Okay, I see somebody has a question. Just go ahead and type it into the chat, and we'll tackle it. Okay. Oh, yeah. So, okay. So someone asked me to repeat just the last bit. If you missed a lot of stuff, I was telling someone earlier, I am also live streaming this, the Facebook, YouTube channel. So you'll be able to go back, after the fact and watch portions that you missed too. But yeah, the thing that I was saying last was just, basically, so that the things that I was, the things, the settings that I was going through, the formatting options that I was going through just a moment ago, changing the color or doing bold and italics and so forth. If you changed those settings without, so we were changing it was a lovely afternoon sentence or whatever you had on your screen. We were changing that while it was selected like this. When you change that, of course, it just changes that sentence, or whatever you have selected. But if you, and it doesn't affect the rest of the document, if you make changes like that without having any text selected like this, then for example, if I turn on italics, then when I start typing, it's going to keep that formatting until I either click to another part of the document where the formatting is different, or I go up here and I turn, and I change those settings back like that. Cool. Well, if folks have any other questions, feel free to just type them. Like I said, at the beginning of class, anytime you have questions, just throw them in the chat, and we'll make sure that they get addressed. I'm not at all concerned about being interrupted or whether it's whether it might feel off topic or something. And, don't worry about that at all. Okay. So someone wants a link to the YouTube channel. The YouTube channel, the easiest way to get to it is just to go to cals.link/YouTube. I put that in the chat just now, cals.link/YouTube. This specific video, if you want to go back and watch this specific, a part of this specific class again, then there's a link there in the Zoom chat. And someone said thank you in the on the Facebook page. You're welcome. Glad you're joining us. All right. I'll drop those links in the live stream as well. Okay, cool. All right, excellent. So, yeah, if you have questions, yeah, like I said, just drop them in the chat anytime, and we'll make sure they get addressed. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about paragraph styles here, formatting. So we talked about your font formatting over here. Now let's talk about different things you can do with paragraphs. So when you're working with a paragraph, your cursor, the little blinking line here that shows where you're working, can be anywhere inside the paragraph. And any of these changes that I'm about to show you will affect the whole thing. Now, again, a paragraph in Word terms is anytime where you press enter or return if you're on a Mac and create a new line manually. So a paragraph is not necessarily a paragraph in the English class sense. But I'm going to click here in inside this paragraph, and I'm going to make some changes here. Okay, so by default, you'll have this gray button. This button here shaded in gray. That's the align left button. So what that means is by default, unless you change something, Word will align your text flush with the left-hand margin of the document. So so all the text will line up against that left-hand margin. But sometimes you don't want that to happen. Sometimes, for instance, you might want the text centered. So if that's the case, I'm going to come up here, click on the center button next to that align left button. And now my text is centered. So you'll notice this moved just a little bit and this moved just a little bit. And down here, this moved a lot so that my paragraph starts in the middle of the page and moves outward. Like so. I can also align text along the right-hand margin if I want some extra space over there. So or over on the left-hand side, or whatever the case may be. I'll click the align right button, and then the text is all lined up with this right-hand margin. And on the left, it's a little bit raggedy, and that's okay. Whenever I'm typing, if I'm aligned to the right, whenever I'm typing, my cursor basically just stays in one place along the right-hand margin, and my text just sort of streams out from behind it. Finally, we have what's called justified text. When I click on this one, it looks a lot like left align at first glance. But if you look over here, you'll notice these three lines of text are also aligned along the right-hand margin. So with justified text, Word actually adjusts the spacing between words to make sure that both sides of the text are lined up with each other. The only thing that, and it'll do that once you finish each line, basically. The only time that doesn't happen is the last line of each paragraph. The last line of each paragraph is just aligned along the left-hand margin. And that gives you some visual separation between paragraphs. You can see, oh, that paragraph ended, and now this one, even though the left-hand side is lined up with the left-hand side of all the rest of the paragraphs, this one is, this one is the first line of a new paragraph. So that's alignment. You can also change how your, let's see, I'm actually gonna left align all of this really quick. Okay, there we go. You can also change how your paragraphs are spaced in relation to each other. And for that, I'm going to actually work with this paragraph right here. So we've got, we have our line spacing at the top of this button here for line and paragraph spacing. We have single space, strict single space, which actually will probably make more sense if I do it with this top paragraph. Strict single space, so basically the very bottom of the lowest character on the first line would meet the top of the very tallest character on the next line. Then you've got 1.15. So that gives you 15 hundredths of a line's worth of space between each line of text. And that's the default situation. So that's what Word is set on unless you change these settings. 1.5 is basically gives you half a line's worth of space between each line of actual text. You've got 2.0, which is double space, double and a half. And then you have triple space right here where you get 2 full lines of blank space in between each line of actual text. So depending on what you're writing and, what kind of style guide you might be following and things like that, you'll want to set these settings accordingly, essentially. But I'll leave it at 1.15, the default, which is pretty nice. It's spaced out enough that it's readable, but it's not spaced out enough that it looks that the text is really far apart. And then we've got 2 additional options here. Line spacing options. So if you want to change the line spacing a little more, if you want to get really into it and make it exactly the way you want it to be, rather than using one of these standard options, you can click line spacing options and change that if you want to. I'm not going to dig into that, but you can do that if you so choose. And there's 2 lines here. There's add space before paragraph and remove space after paragraph. Add space before paragraph is going to, if you look at, let's go back down here to this paragraph. If I add space before paragraph, so it's going to make some additional space between it and the previous one, the first paragraph. Remove space after paragraph removes that default space that I pointed out towards the beginning of class that Word puts between each paragraph. So it'll look just like part of the same paragraph visually. So, depending on what kind of style guide you're following or things like that, you may want to change some of these settings. But I usually leave it as is because it looks pretty good. Okay, so that's that. There are a few options here it's not really worth going into that much. But I do want to talk about these 3 up at the top here. These are our list options. So let's say I want to write a list. I'm going to do a list of Star Wars characters. All right, in order of appearance, in case you're keeping score at home. So here we go. I've got my list, but it's not looking great. It just kind of looks like I started to write a paragraph and then I gave up. So I want to actually make it look more like a list. To do that, I'm going to select, since I've already written some of the items for the list, I'm going to select them. And I'm going to come up here to the top, click on this bullets button right here. When I click on the button itself, it's going to create little bullet points to the left of each item on the list. And it's going to indent the list a little bit so that it's clear that this is a separate entity from the paragraph up top. If I want to change the look of the bullet points, I can do that as well. I click the drop down arrow here and I can change it from a standard bullet to this hollow one or a square or whatever this weird smudgy thing is, or a check mark or whatever. I can even click define new bullet and I can choose any character from any of the fonts installed on my computer and use it as a bullet symbol. And so that's really handy. It makes your lists look a little bit more like a list and gives it a nice sense of sort of polish. Now that I have a list, if I want to add more items to the list, it's super duper easy. All I need to do is press enter, is come over here to the end of the item before the item that I want to add, press enter, and it'll create a new bullet point, indent it for me automatically, and I can start typing. Nice. If I want to, if I wanted to throw something else in here, I can go to the end of this one, press enter, and it'll make a space for me in between. So I can do, you know, there we go. Okay, so so that's a bulleted list. If you want just things that could be in any order, or you know, things where the order is not necessarily important, where it's not like steps you're trying to follow, or you know, things like that, then a bulleted list is great for that. You can also do a numbered list in kind of a similar way. So I'm going to come down here. Oh, how to get out of list mode. So I'm at the end, you know, let's say I don't want to add anymore. Then I can press enter to get a new bullet point, and then press enter again, and it'll actually bring me back to the margin, and you know, unindent and remove the little bullet point. So now I can type some regular text. Okay, so let's say I want a numbered list. Again, I could type out the items on my list and then select them and click the numbering button up here. But I know off the bat that I want this to be a numbered list. So instead of doing that, I'm going to go ahead and click the numbering button before I start typing the list. And now I get bullet point number 1, and I can start typing. Each time I hit enter, it's going to give me the next number, so I don't have to type that out or anything. It'll fill in the next number and it'll indent for me. And so I'm all set. Okay, so sometimes what we might want to do with this is we might want to fill it in with some sub items, so different types of breakfasts and so forth. So if I want to do that, I'm going to click where it says breakfast here, press enter next to it, and it's going to give me number 2 and renumber all these other ones, but I don't actually want that. What I'm going to do is hit tab on the left-hand side of my keyboard, and you'll notice now my 2 turns into an A. So this is a sub point underneath breakfast now. So now I can say something like, you know, eggs, bacon, toast, cereal, and so on and so forth. If I went sub items underneath that, I could say, I'll hit enter underneath toast, press tab again, and I can say wheat toast and white toast. If I want to add an item between, if I want to add a breakfast food in between toast and cereal, I'm going to hold shift while pressing tab this time. And that's going to take me down a level, or up a level, I guess. I don't know. Left a level? Is that a thing? And then I could say, you know, oatmeal. Technically is a kind of cereal, I guess. So that's how you would do what's called a multi-level list, or an outline kind of format. But you can also tweak this. So up here at the top where it says multi-level list, now this is just a drop down. If I click on this, it's not really going to do anything. But since I'm working in a list right now, since my cursor is here, I can click on this multi-level list button, and I can change the list to be like, rather than 1 period and then breakfast and then a period and eggs and so forth, I could do kind of right parentheses like this, or I can do 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and those sorts of things. I could choose, you know, articles. I could do articles and sections. I could do I could do these different kinds of bullets. So all sorts of stuff you could do there, just depending on the situation. You could do Roman numerals as your top level. So I, and then I, etc. So it just all depends on what you're going for, basically. I think the default one kind of makes the most sense right now. Interesting. Well, it doesn't want me to get back to that. Whatever. In any case, doesn't matter that much. So well, let's just undo. By the way, if in case y'all are interested, there is a way to undo from the keyboard rather than having to come up here and click the undo button with the mouse. You can press Control V. So if you're on a Windows computer, you hold Control in the bottom left corner or the bottom right corner of your keyboard, and then press Z, and that'll undo. If you're on a Mac, you'll hold Command while pressing Z. Command is the one with the little squiggly thing that kind of looks like the range on a stove. So hold that and press Z. So we've got the so that will that's the keyboard shortcut for undo, not only in Word, but in pretty much all computer programs. So in pretty much any computer program where you can undo, Control Z is undo, and on a Windows computer, Command Z is undo on a Mac. Someone says, how did I get the I on wheat? So I made a new item after toast. Or no, excuse me. After toast, I press enter like that to get a new item. And then I press tab again on my keyboard, and that indented it to the next level again. So I had 1 and then A, and then the kind of I, or Roman numeral 1, I guess is really what that is. You got it. All right. So that's lists. If you're doing a multi-level list, it's a little tricky sometimes to get out of list mode, depending on your version of Word. So rather than pressing enter, you might have to press enter and then hit backspace a bunch of times to get back to typing regular text. But that's not the worst thing in the whole world. It's just kind of annoying. Okay, so that's lists. There's one other thing I want to point out in this paragraph area here. Oh, if you want to manually indent anything, you've got decrease indent here and increase indent here. So you can click on those and do that. And you also have this thing right here, which is show or hide formatting symbols or paragraph marks or whatever. If I click on this, then a lot of things that are usually invisible become visible. So there's a little dot in between each word to represent the spaces, which normally obviously are invisible. There's a little paragraph mark at the end of each paragraph where I hit enter. There's an arrow wherever you've indented. And those are all the ones we see right now, but there are some others that I can show you a little later. I'll click the button again to turn that off. But sometimes that's really useful. If your document's not doing what you expect it to do, turn on those formatting marks, and then you can see all the invisible stuff that's happening in your document. And you can go, oh, I didn't mean to have a section break there or whatever. So that's handy sometimes. Okay, let's see. Let's go ahead and talk for a few moments about inserting a picture. And then we will, we'll do the last little bit on things, ways to change the layout of the page that can be really useful. So pictures. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here to the top. And I'm going to click on the Insert tab there. When I click on that, what it's going to do is give me, it's going to change all these options that are down here in the ribbon, again, just like we saw before. And there's the option to insert pictures. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to click right smack dab in the middle of this paragraph here. So I'm going to go after the sentence that ends either and before the sentence that starts it. I'm going to put my cursor right there. And I say that just to point out, it kind of matters where the cursor is when you insert a picture. So I'm going to come up here, and on your version of Word, depending on what it is, this may look slightly different. You might have like a picture button and an online pictures button, or search for a picture or something like that. And you may, just depending on the situation. But I'm going to click on this pictures here, and then it says insert picture from this device, stock images, or online pictures. You may have a little pop-up box that does that instead. I am going to choose this device, but just so you know, the stock images option here, these are images that are actually free for you to use. And that's pretty handy, because if you're putting in, if you're writing something that's going to be published or used for advertising or publicity, things like that, then you want to make sure that you actually have the legal rights to use whatever that is. So stock images are a way that you can essentially make sure that you're using an image that you have permission to use. If you just need a picture and it's not going to really go anywhere particularly formal or be published or used to promote anything commercial, then you can just choose this online pictures option. You'll go to Microsoft's Bing search engine, and you'll be able to find a picture online somewhere by doing a search. Or choosing this device will allow you to just pick a picture from your computer. So that's what I'm going to do. All right, I've got my little dialog box here. It's being really slow. My computer's weird today, y'all. So I'm just going to browse. You might find some pictures in your pictures folder, for example, or things like that. I'm going to choose the graphic for this class and drop that in there. Now you'll notice, because my cursor was after either, but before it was a beautiful sunny day, the picture shows up right there, and it actually cuts that paragraph in half. The reason for that is, by default in Word, your pictures are, as we say in computer world, in line, which means that Word is treating them as part of the text. You can see this if I take the little dot here and I drag it down to make the picture somewhat smaller, or a lot smaller. Look at this. It actually, and I suppose that means it wasn't actually night either. Picture of Microsoft Word Part 1. It was a beautiful sunny day, blah, 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 blah. So the text is in line. If I add more text before, or the picture is in line, if I add more text before the picture, then the picture is going to move over here just like any word would in, inside of this paragraph. And so that's the default way that Word handles pictures. But usually that doesn't work very well. The only reason I've ever found that I would need to do that would be if I were giving some sort of directions and I wanted to, rather than say, click the OK button, I could put a picture of the OK button in the document or whatever. So you might do something like that. But generally speaking, for most documents, this is not how you want it to be. And I will say, if you're writing a document that's going to use a lot of images, where it's going to be a heavy mixture of pictures and text, Word is not the program for you for that document. Word is a word processing program. It's great for writing words and making those words look exactly the way you want and making sure they're the right words and so on and so forth. But it's not great with pictures in general. If you need to throw a picture or two into your document, that's why Word supports this functionality. But at the end of the day, Word is a text composition tool. It's not a graphic design tool. And so you'll want to use something like Canva or Microsoft Publisher if you have access to it, or if you're fancy, something like Adobe InDesign, if you're doing actual graphic design. But if you're doing just if you're just kind of throwing in a picture or two to illustrate things or to decorate a little bit, then Word is great for that. Okay, so I've dropped the picture in here and I've got it selected. So you'll notice the little dots around here in the corner that tell me that I'm working with the picture right now. And you'll notice up at the top, I have this picture format tab that wasn't here before. And that'll appear in certain situations if I add certain types of things to my document and I'm working with them. So in this case, the picture format tab is the settings for this particular picture or tools for working with this particular picture. In some versions of Word, it'll be called like the picture tools format tab or something like that. But regardless, it does the same thing. So I could do things like change the look of it, add a little like frame or border around it, or a little shadow behind it or something. I can change the colors, remove a background, although it's a very primitive tool that they have for that, to be honest with you. I could add a border around it or various effects like shadows and embossing and so on. I can crop the image if I need to reshape it, or I can change the size, of course. If I click out of the picture, then those options go away, and I'll only get that tab back if I'm working with the picture. One key thing, though, to point out is wrap text, and it's also down here. This button's a little more convenient, so I'm going to use this. If I click on this where it says layout options, it's going to give me some options for how my text and my pictures are going to relate to each other. So right now we have it in line with the text, like I mentioned a moment ago. But I can use what's called text wrapping instead. This one, square, if I click on that, then it's going to arrange my text in such a way that means it wasn't actually night either. It was a beautiful sunny day, not a cloud was in the sky. So that's what this is doing. It's basically taking the approximate position of the image and sort of wrapping the text around it in this particular way. If I click on it again, I get tight, which is the same thing, but with less space in between the text and the picture. I can use through, which is not going to affect this particular picture. But if I had a picture with a transparent background, then it would allow me to, if I had a star or something, like it would allow me to put words in between the bottom two legs of the star or whatever. But this one is rectangular, so it doesn't make a difference. Let's see, I've got top and bottom. Usually that's a really good option. It just puts it above the line that the picture actually lives on, and separates it out, so that it essentially has its own line in the document. And then there's behind text and in front of text, both of which are exactly what they sound like. Behind text puts the picture behind the text and lets it just run right through as though the picture wasn't there. And in front of the text does the same thing. It actually blocks you from seeing the text in that situation, which might be the effect you're going for, but usually isn't. And then you do have the option to choose whether it moves with the text. So if I added something to the beginning of this paragraph, would the picture move? Or whether it has a fixed position on the page. So you drag it around, it stays where it's going to, and the text basically just flows around it. So that's pictures. Let me actually go back to square, or no, tight, I guess. And we'll bring it down here somewhere. There we go. That's pretty good. Okay, so I'll put it there for now. Or maybe up here. Nice. All right. Oh, and I do want to choose fixed position on page. Otherwise, we're going to have all sorts of headaches with the rest of our examples here. Okay. So let's talk about the last thing in my little outline here. Let's talk about kind of our layout options that we have access to. So up at the top, I am going to click layout, which makes sense. And I've got a bunch of things here that I can work with to make my page look exactly the way I want. Now, one thing I'm going to do, I'm going to come down here. I'm going to zoom out a little bit so we can see the whole page, because that can actually help in this situation. Okay, so we've got a better idea of what the page looks like overall. First thing to point out is the margins option. So if I click up here on margins, I get a drop-down menu, and now I can go normal margins. The default margins in Word are 1 inch all around, but I could go to narrow, where I have 1/2 inch all around. I can go to moderate, which is 3/4 of an inch on the side and 1 inch on the top and bottom. I can go wide, which is 2 inches on the left and right and 1 inch on the top and bottom. That's crazy. Mirrored, which will kind of give me 2 sort of sections of the page, or the Office 2003 default, which was 1 inch on the top and 1.25 on the left and right. I'll stick with normal for now, but you can see how that affects it. Obviously, the text sort of reflows to fill in the margins that we have. I can change the orientation like I showed you before, so I could turn the page on its side, basically. I could choose the size of page, so letter size 8.5 by 11 is the default, but I could do tabloid 11 by 17, so I get a wider page and a taller page. I could do executive, which is 7.25 by 10.5. You really would think that executives might have more to write rather than less, but I don't know. I don't make the rules of fancy this. And then, a bunch of other things. There's all sorts of stuff you can do there. You can change to all sorts of different sizes. You can also put your your document in columns rather than a single column like this. If I click on the columns button, I can change it to 2. So my entire document is in 2 columns now. And because I don't have so much text, it kind of just all goes together in one. But if I continue typing, or honestly, if I just selected this whole paragraph, yeah, okay, well. And then I pasted it down here, so I'm going to copy. And then paste it in. Whoops, there we go. Okay, great. And I'll go ahead and create some more copies of this. Copy, and then I can paste. If you right click, you can click paste in that menu, or you can click one of these options to paste there, or you can, on the home tab, you can click the little clipboard to paste with the default settings. Or my personal preference is to use, again, the keyboard shortcut. Hold Control or Command if you're on a Mac, and press V, Control V or Command V. And I can get so many copies of this paragraph. Lovely. Okay, so now I have a fuller document and I can kind of play around with it. All right, so you can also change some other stuff. So if I go back up here, I'll go to the layout tab again, columns, and switch it back to 1. Okay, there we go. If I wanted just a certain portion of my document to be in columns, then I can select that section, click columns here and click more columns. And I can have apply to selected text. Choose a number of columns up here. And now only this portion of my document will be in columns and everything else will be single column, like so. Although it doesn't look like it when I'm down here in this list. let's undo that so that it'll make sense what's happening there. Or no, actually, we need that. Okay, so one other thing that's really useful here is this breaks drop-down menu. And this is kind of the last thing that we're going to cover, except for the questions that folks have. When I click on this breaks, you'll see there are a bunch of different options here. Some of these we don't really need to get into, but there are a few just really useful ones. The first one is the page break. So I'm going to come over here where I have the end of this list, and I'm going to add a little extra space right there. And let's say that I want this list to be the last thing on the page before we move into this paragraph over and over again. If that's the case, the thing that people usually do to make that happen is go enter until they get to the top of the next page. That works okay until you try to edit your document. Once you try to edit your document, let's say that I've got it that way. Let's say that I add another copy of this paragraph right here. Now I have this big old gap at the top of this page, and I have to come in here and go backspace, 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 backspace until I get it to the top of the page. What I can do instead of that, though, I'm going to undo all of that. And what I can do instead is I can insert what's called a page break here. So I'm going to come up here, click on where it says breaks, and click page. And what that does is it says right here where my cursor is, where the little blinking line is, that I want to be the beginning of a new page. I'll hit delete to go ahead and get rid of the empty space there. If I add extra text to the beginning of this page, so another copy of that paragraph, and maybe one more just for kicks. When I scroll down here, you'll notice this is still at the top. The page break is keeping these separate. If I had one more copy of the paragraph, whoops. Then this goes below the bottom of the page, but instead of then crowding the columns, it just moves them to the top of the next page after that. So page break is really handy because whenever you need a section or a chapter or something like that to end, or if you've got like a title page and then your document and then like a references or works cited page, then you can keep those all separate and not have to worry about how changes you're making in the middle of the document are affecting those other parts of the document that are somewhat separate. If I go to the Home tab and click the little thing to turn on those formatting marks, you can see exactly where the page break is right there. There's actually a section break here as well because I started the columns right here. And then you can also insert the other break that I want to show you is a column break. So if I come down here, I've got these in columns. Rather than having this paragraph split in half, I want to just have this paragraph be the end of this column. So I'm going to click here and I'm going to click insert, layout, breaks, column. And that adds a column break right here, which says, okay, that was the end of this column. So anything after this goes at the top of the next one. And that's how it worked out. And that's pretty much it for today. Thank you so much for sticking with me. I know we ran a little long. I'm sorry about that. Tomorrow, what we're going to be covering in part 2 is we're going to be doing styles, style sets, and themes, which is basically like making your document look really nice and be a lot more readable for your audience. There are some really cool tools in Word to do that that I want to show you. We'll talk about mail merges, like I mentioned toward the beginning of class, which are a very, very useful feature if you're sending out a lot of documents or copies of documents. And finally, we'll talk about some collaboration and review tools so that you can edit people's documents for them or your own documents, or you can collaborate on a document with someone, or they can edit for you. What questions do we, anybody who has to go, I totally understand. Thanks for sticking around. See you tomorrow, hopefully. But anybody who has questions, I'm happy to tackle those before we wrap it up. So go ahead and shoot those to me in the chat or in the comments if you've got them. All right. I don't really see anything in terms of questions. I'm so glad y'all are here today. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you got a lot out of it. And like I said, I hope I'll see you tomorrow. If you do think of questions between now and then, you can shoot me an email. The email address to use is digital@cals, CALS.org, O-R-G. And I will see y'all tomorrow. In the meantime, have a fantastic rest of the day and talk to you soon.